Good afternoon. My name is Evan Taylor with NFP. I'm a Senior Vice President in our Property and Casualty Group. And today we're going to talk very quickly in our lightning round about cybersecurity. Prior to joining NFP, I was with the FBI and performed cyber investigations. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about the cyber risk landscape, who the attackers are, how they're attacking victim companies, how companies can mitigate the risk, and some of the insurance considerations to go with that. So first, we'll talk about the threat landscape. We'll talk about specific ways that companies can mitigate the risk from cybersecurity attacks, how to transfer the risk if companies consider doing that. So how do they insure against that attack? And then also some of the challenges that have been presented due to COVID in the cybersecurity space for companies. First, this screen really provides the overview of all the different types of attackers with many different motives and ways of carrying out their attacks and different levels of sophistication. You'll see on the far left there are traditional nuisance attackers. So these attackers are generally not very well trained. They're often driven by botnets of thousands of computers that have been compromised and are being used by attackers to carry out their attacks. They're not targeted really in any way, and most of the anatomy of the attack is automated. Nuisance attacks are very often they're ridden with typos and spell check errors and poor English. And so nuisance type of attacks, those are what we all consider spam attacks that we get in our emails personally and professionally. And for most folks, if they use common sense, they won't click on things they shouldn't click on. They won't fall victim to a nuisance attack. Next, we talk about data theft. So these are state-sponsored actors normally that are generally trying to get an economic or political advantage. So they are attackers that are working for a foreign government very often. So they're working for an intelligence service, for a foreign entity, a foreign research body, again, trying to get an economic or political advantage. They're very often seeking to carry out some sort of intellectual property theft. Their attacks are extremely well targeted. They're very advanced. They're very persistent. We've been experiencing these now for decades, and some of our biggest adversaries on a global scale have been using data theft to carry out attacks and to build their economies. Next, you'll see cybercrime in purple. This is where most of the attacks that we hear about fall because they have the loudest splash in the media, and they're attacks carried out sometimes by foreign governments, but very often by organized criminal enterprises that are seeking to get financial gain. Very often you'll see credit card theft, employee census data, W-2 theft, so that attackers can file fraudulent tax returns on employees. These attacks are very targeted in nature. They're somewhat opportunistic, so attackers will carry out multiple breaches simultaneously, looking for weak points of entry into networks of companies so that they can try and monetize their access. Next is hacktivism. Many folks will remember the names like LulzSec and the Anonymous movement and the Occupy movement from years past. These are organizations that they used cybersecurity means and data breaches to carry out their social or political agenda. So they often carry out website defamations. They seek to put out bad press and bad PR for their victim companies. And lastly, there's network attacks. These are the types of attacks that candidly keep government officials up late at night. They're meant for escalation, conflict escalation. They're meant for destruction of critical infrastructure. And so very often you see these types of attacks where, the power grid in a nation is cut off remotely by an adversary when in the heat of summer or in the cold of winter, shutting off oil and gas supplies, shutting off access to cash via the ATM networks with major financial institutions. These are conflict driven and generally, nation on nation types of attacks. So some risk management considerations. There are real things that companies can do to protect themselves from today's cybersecurity attackers. I generally will classify these as people, process, and technology considerations. So evaluating your internal IT resources with your employees. Who are the people that we need to be relying on to prepare for and respond to an attack? Who are our external vendors that we're going to rely on? Whether it's IT security, data breach counsel, forensic services, Are there credit monitoring firms, if we carry a lot of customer data, that we need to build relationships with credit monitoring firms in case we have a breach, and we need to notify those victims quickly. Training. We see a lot of companies spending lots of time and resources on phishing training, wire transfer protocols within accounting and finance departments, social media awareness. So not putting things out on the internet about your company, and having policies and procedures around that. And then lastly, having employee offerings like LifeLock, ID Shield, et cetera. So how do we protect our employees if they experience a breach personally? Related to processes, companies that send wires, ACH or EFT wire transfers outbound to vendors. We see a lot of these processes that have been compromised by attackers, and the communications compromised, and money that's wired inadvertently to attackers instead of to the correct recipient. These wire transfer processes and controls are very complex, and there are specific ways that companies, very tangible, easy things companies can do, controls they can put into place to try and mitigate a lot of this fraud. Incident response planning. We see companies spending a lot of time talking about how to prepare for and respond to a data breach. And then lastly, third-party vendor audit. So looking at IT service providers, managed services providers, managed service security providers, and looking at the processes with those vendors on how to respond to an attack, and doing audits of those vendors to make sure that companies are partnered correctly all the time with the right partners to respond to a cybersecurity issue. Lastly, technology. Obviously, having an assessment of your current hardware, your software, your IT infrastructure is critical, and then knowing where do we have gaps in our infrastructure, what does our budget allocation look like to fix those gaps, and is this a 1, a 2, a 3, a 5-year timeline to get on the right road from an IT standpoint. Next, we'll talk about cyber liability insurance trends. So many people have now heard of cyber insurance, cybersecurity insurance. We're not going to get too much into the weeds of what does a policy cover. In short, it's covering the direct cost and the indirect costs associated with a company being attacked. And a carrier will provide a host of services to a company and help them resolve that attack quickly. What are some of the services that these insurance carriers are providing to differentiate themselves? We see them providing incident simulation workshops, best practices workshops, endpoint threat detection and response tools, sometimes for free, sometimes at a reduced rate for customers, dark web monitoring of client information, CISO trainings, sand table exercises to go through a breach response scenario, employee cybersecurity and phishing simulations. We're seeing a lot more complexity and time spent around value proposition from carriers to client companies in the cyber liability insurance marketplace. Next, the preferred vendor panels. There's a lot of conversation around the vendors that the insurance carriers mandate their customers use in the event of a breach. Why is this so important? These vendors have all been vetted. They have the ability to scale up with a customer if they experience maybe a small issue that becomes a very large issue, a multi-state issue, a multi-thousand employee issue. So expert legal counsel, expert forensic services vendors have been pre-vetted by the carriers. The firms have significant experience in the space. They have the ability to scale as a breach scales. They have agreed upon lower rates. So instead of paying $400 an hour for a forensic services investigator, you may pay $100 an hour because the carrier has channeled so much business to them. Most importantly, I think for those that experience a ransomware case, these forensic vendors very often have established Bitcoin wallets. They have established presence and their ability to make payments in cryptocurrency, which is critical in paying a ransomware payment and securing your data. Lastly, we're going to talk about what's happened due to COVID. So as most of you all have experienced, the post-COVID work environment has changed dramatically. The amount of work from home that occurred in first and second quarter of 2020 and has really become semi-permanent in the U.S. economy is unbelievable. There's been a rapid work from home transition. Corporate networks have been extended more than most IT employees ever thought possible or imaginable. And so there's been an explosion of personal device usage, an explosion of home network extensions of corporate networks. not surprisingly, there's been a very lack of a defined security roadmap and more activity by attackers who are trying to compromise this lax culture. And when folks are at home, they very often are more relaxed, and so they're clicking on things they shouldn't click on. They're not following certain protocols. As such, I mean, obviously the threat landscape continues to evolve to respond to the COVID work environment. So what are some of the challenges that a lot of companies are experiencing? Obviously, home anything has changed a lot with COVID. Home network security, home computer security, home to office connectivity, VPN challenges that companies have experienced, because now instead of a tenth of their employees trying to VPN every day, 95% of employees are attempting to VPN every day, all day. So the bandwidth requirements have exceeded, maybe where they were 12 months ago. Video meeting security, we've all heard about Zoom bombs. Honestly, managing data breaches remotely is a very critical challenge. So you can't all just jump into a boardroom as a leadership team and manage the incident response process, and that's tough. And then really what's compounding the challenges, there's been a big increased demand on very limited IT resources and information security resources. These are internal and external. So managed security providers, managed service security providers, and security providers, they've experienced a far increased demand on their time and on their resources than they're able to support. There's a lot of pressure on company owners to move to a fully remote workforce, and there's very often a critical understanding or a critical misunderstanding of what all that entails from a technology standpoint and a security standpoint. The security perimeter has continued to change and evolve during the COVID crisis, and then obviously non-sanctioned cloud usage has exploded as well. Employees, they can't find what they need on their computer networks with work, or using Dropbox and other unauthorized third-party providers, which is just creating data security concerns across the economy. So that's our short lightning round on cybersecurity. Hopefully you found it helpful. My name is Evan Taylor with NFP, and again, we appreciate your time.